Here we are back from our break, and there were two questions that came up during the break when we were talking about some of these issues. The first one was about the Protestant Reformation and whether it was a result of the Black Death. Historians disagree on whether it was or not. One school of thought attributes the conditions caused by the Black Death as one of the causes of the Protestant Reformation, and other people think that the church was doing just fine and that other causes later caused the Protestant Reformation. So I just thought I'd mention that. The other question we had during the break was by our director, Don, who asked a really good question here. He said, did the Black Death affect the Muslims and the Byzantines too? And yes, it did. It utterly devastated them, and that's why I have this map back on our monitor now, because this is the reason the Ottoman Turks swept into that area, because remember that there were other people there, other Muslims there, Turks who had been there a long, long time and were converted to Muslims. This was a fresh, new, barbarian wave of Turks, the Ottoman Turks, who swept in from the plains of Central Asia, conquered that region because it was so weakened by the Black Death, and then swept into Europe. So the answer is yes, they were affected just as much as Europe, and I don't have the sources to tell you more specifically how they were affected, but they were affected just as fully. Okay, so now Europe took a century to recover from the Black Death, and then, remember the Black Death, not quite a century actually. The Black Death first hit in 1347. It hit again year after year after year. It came back over and over and over again. At a certain point, Europeans had a kind of immunity to it, and that's one reason it calmed down. It didn't take quite 100 years to recover, but maybe it did. I don't know. But we see Europe again taking the first tentative steps out to explore the world in 1415 with Prince Henry the Navigator. And he was the Prince of Portugal. He established a kind of trading post, an exploration post an outpost from which he could launch new exploratory expeditions on the coast of Africa in a town called Ceuta. And then from Ceuta, and I'm going to jump ahead and then I'm going to come back to this again, but here you can see Portugal. It's the yellow part there. Ceuta is the outpost he established in North Africa, and there you can see it. Here is a close-up so you can see where those places are. Ceuta was an outpost from which he could launch other expeditions, and I'm going to go on to the next one. And so he launched those expeditions down the coast of Africa, and each one was about a day's sailing journey, and you can see where those loops go into the post and where the trading posts were set up, and all along the coast of Africa. So they jumped down and he would sail a day's journey, found a trading post, go back, and then sail 2 days' journey and found all those trading posts. And in that way, the Portuguese worked their way all around Africa and ended up in India. Okay, I'm going to go back now to our list. Okay, so all of those trading posts were established along the coast of West Africa. Then, that took about 100 years. In 1487, Bartholomew Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope, which is at the southern tip of Africa. And in 1497 to 98, Vasco da Gama sailed the Cape route all around Africa to India. Then, in 1510, Alfonso de Albuquerque conquered Indonesia and Malacca. And do you recognize that name? Where do you know that name, Alfonso de Albuquerque, from? Yeah?
from Albuquerque, New York, New Mexico.
Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yeah, not New York, Mexico, New Mexico. He went there too. He went to New Mexico. This is a traveler who traveled all over the New World and all over Indonesia, Malacca, and China. And this is the most interesting man. There's a new book out about him that tells about his life. He went everywhere. So he traveled in the Americas. So in one lifetime, a person could travel to the whole of different parts of the world. And then in 1513, the Portuguese reached China. Okay, so the movement starts with Prince Henry the Navigator in 1415. 100 years later, they're in China. So you have this incredible, only 100 years it takes for the Portuguese to go all the way around Africa, go to India, and they founded trading posts in India, and they founded trading posts in Malacca, in Malaysia, and all the way to China. It only took 100 years. This is absolutely extraordinary. Okay, so here are the Portuguese and Ceuta, and there is our close-up of Portugal and Ceuta, and the trips around the coast of Africa on the way to Asia. And here we see a map. You can see that yellow line that shows the routes all around Africa and all the way to India. That's Goa. That colony in India is Goa. You can see that. And the red route is the voyage of Columbus at the very same time. So you see both of those expeditions of exploration happening on that map. And here is Christopher Columbus. Okay, Columbus reaches America. Okay, and Columbus, and here we start a new wave of colonization. Columbus rediscovers America. All the myths you've heard about Columbus are myths. Okay? He knew that there was something across the ocean. He wasn't trying to get to India. He knew the New World was there. Why? Because he studied navigation in Norway, and they still knew that the New World was there in Norway and in Scandinavia. The stories you've heard about him, saying the world is round and nobody thought the world is round is a myth, because every educated person knew that the world was round. They already knew that. They studied Greek science. And so Columbus rediscovered America, and he wrote in his journal, he published his letters that became bestsellers all over the New World. Everybody was absolutely electrified by the discovery of the new land across the Atlantic. It became very popular, and so waves of explorers followed Columbus. Lots of them followed in his footsteps. John Cabot in 1496 rediscovers Newfoundland. Remember, the Vikings were there first, so he went across the North Atlantic and he found Newfoundland. In 1519 to 22, and that's only like 22 years later, Magellan circumnavigated the world. He sailed all the way around the world. That's only 20 years after Columbus discovered America. In 1518, at about the very same time, Cortez conquered the Aztecs, conquered them in 1 year in practically one battle, and then shortly thereafter, in 1532 to 35, Pizarro conquered the Incas in Peru, again in practically one battle. Just a couple of years it took him. Meanwhile, more Spaniards were exploring in North America. Hernando de Soto landed in Florida. And in 1553 to 55, England founded the Muscovy Company, and thereafter colonization of North America began. And European trading companies spread everywhere, not just in the New World, but in Africa, in Asia, everywhere the Europeans went, they either conquered or founded colonies. The Portuguese, by and large, just founded trading posts or colonies where they could trade, trading outposts. The English settled with colonists in the New World, and the Spaniards tended to conquer wherever they went. Okay, in 1577 to 79, Sir Francis Drake circumnavigated the world. Now, less than 100 years, the Europeans have gone all over the world. They have the time frame is just phenomenal. The way they burst out of Europe to the whole world. And here are the routes of some of the voyages. Let's see, the purple is Columbus. The yellow is Vasco da Gama and also Amerigo Vespucci. Of course, America is named after Amerigo Vespucci because he was the one who publicized that it was a new land. The green is Magellan, sailing around South America and then around the world. You see him coming back from Asia on the right-hand side of the map. And the blue is John Cabot sailing across the North Atlantic. And so we have this just Europe was so electrified, and they just burst out to discover the whole world. Here is another map of the Voyages of Discovery. These are successive voyages. Columbus made at least 3 voyages. He made a very large number of voyages across. And like the Vikings, they used the Canary Islands as stepping stones to get across the Atlantic and get to the New World. Okay. And here you see Magellan exploring the Pacific and sailing around to the Pacific. Let me see where my notes are. Okay, the Pacific discovered by Magellan and the whole South Pacific culture. Who had been there before? The Malaysians, who were the Polynesians who had settled the whole Pacific. Now these peoples were rediscovered by Magellan in all their islands that they settled in across the Pacific. And here are the Pacific Islands again. These are the gardens at Singapore. Pacific Islands look like that. Here's the country discovered by Columbus. It's San Salvador, and it's those yellow islands are the regions that he discovered. The lines are where he sailed. Okay, and here's a close-up of this map. This is by Spanish explorers into the Mayan lands of Central America. These are the maps they made, and of North America. Those lines, you see those lines that come out almost like a spider web. Those are portolan charts. Those are the portolan. That's what a portolan chart is, to help you locate where you are. Okay, and here is the area of Central America and South America discovered by the. This is a copy of a Spanish map. Okay, that shows where they went. And here's the landing of Columbus. Obviously, this is a modern picture of what we imagine it might have looked like. And as he landed in the New World, here is Amerigo Vespucci. This is his Latin name, Americus Vespucius. And here is John Cabot, who sailed across the North Atlantic, and Ferdinand Magellan, who sailed all the way around the world. I think he was killed on the way home. He didn't quite make it, but his ship made it back. A heroic adventure. And here is Cortez, who conquered the Aztecs. Here is a picture of him in his armor. I have another picture of him in a moment. Here, of course, going back to our lecture on the New World, here are the New World civilizations that were found. The Inca Empire, the Aztec Empire, and the Mayan culture. The Aztec, of course, is the orange. The Mayan culture is the purple. And the Inca Empire is the yellow. So these were the great civilizations that were found. They were conquered in practically no time at all, an amazingly quick conquest of these cultures. Here, when the when the Spaniards got there, they were utterly shocked. And remember the Aztecs, this is the sacrificial altar of the Aztecs. Remember that the Aztecs were sacrificing something like 20,000 people a year, human sacrifices to their religion, which was a very bloodthirsty religion. Here is one of these Aztec gods. And of course the Spaniards were utterly, completely shocked. The Spaniards who went are called Conquistadores, and they were in some sense a continuation of the crusading movement in Spain. Remember we talked about Spain and the pushing out of the Muslims. There was a very enthusiastic, almost fanatical feeling of promoting Christianity in Spain because of the reconquest of Spain and the importance of pushing the Muslims out. And they expelled the Jews as well as the Muslims, and an extreme devotion to Christianity. And this carried over into the crusade, into the conquest of the New World. The conquistadores were interesting in that not all of them were nobles. Only a few of them were nobles, and most of them were kind of minor knights and of lower class, but they still were infused with that kind of crusading Christian spirit. And so a lot of their zeal for conquering the New World was infused with some of the values that we saw in the crusade. One of them was wanting to get rich quick. I mean, this is one of the reasons they went as conquistadors to the New World, was to win their fortune. And so immediately after Columbus discovered America, all the gold of the Aztecs and the Incas was very well known, and so the Spanish wanted the gold. The conquistadores wanted to get rich. They were accompanied by priests and monks who came to convert the Indians who they found in the New World, the natives, to be converted. Not all of these monks were bloodthirsty and vicious. Of course, when they came, one of the first things they did was burn all the books. And so the books were burned. The Aztecs had a written language. Some of their books survive, but a lot of them were burned. And there were priests who had great sympathy for the natives. One whose work is very well worth reading is Garcilaso de la Vega, who had great sympathy for the Indians and tried to record some of their customs. And he didn't try to just wipe them out completely. They discovered these new lands, and here they're so exotic, and these people were hardened adventurers from just the hardship of their journeys. And here are the Llamas in Peru. The Spaniards slaughtered the Mexicans at Cholula. Here is one of the great battles. This, of course, is a drawing of it, not a real picture, but an imagination of what that battle must have been like. And we have to remember that the Spaniards had a technological superiority. In the first place, they were riding horses. And the Indians had never seen horses, because remember when we studied the New World, there were no animals, virtually no animals. There were llamas. There were llamas in Peru, and there were buffalo and deer in North America, but no domesticated animals, and certainly no horses, and nobody was riding any kind of animal. So here they saw these men on horseback that seemed to them like gods. And things were even worse, because we had the legend of Quetzalcoatl, who had gone away in their legends and would return one day to take over his land again. And so some of the Indians, and especially Montezuma, who was the king of the Aztecs, thought of these Spaniards as the return of Quetzalcoatl. And so they thought of their god coming back because it fit their legends. The technological superiority of the Spaniards included steel and iron swords, which are much better than the obsidian knives of the Aztecs, and gunpowder. They had guns, and even though they were very primitive guns and cannons that took a long time to load and to shoot, they were guns and cannons, and they looked into the Aztecs. They seemed very terrifying. And so we see the fire and brimstone of the Spaniards attacking here. As far as the Incas are concerned, the Inca Empire here, and we see our map of the Inca Empire. Let's go back to the Aztec Empire. The battle was won with virtually one battle. And remember the structure of the Aztec Empire and the Inca Empire, both of them. They were so communal, they were so community-oriented, and they were so accustomed to obeying their leader and not rebelling, that essentially what the Spaniards did was take over the kingship, take over the king, kill the king, and take over the whole social and political pyramid because of the structure of the government that it was. And so this is another way that made the conquest very easy and very quick, the conquest of the Aztec Empire. And the same is true of the Peruvians, who were even more communal and even more disciplined to obey their leaders. And so when Pizarro came into Peru, here's one of the Inca kings, Atahualpa. The Inca was the name of the ruler. It was his title was Inca. And all they had to do was kill him, and then they took over, because the whole structure would just obey. The whole political and social structure was trained to obey the ruler, whoever that ruler was. So all they did was lop off the head. Here I've shown you these before. Here are some Peruvians in Peru. These are modern day, of course. And here is the magnificent, glorious civilization that they conquered in Peru. You can see the terraced hillsides and the beautiful fortifications up the mountain of the Inca Empire. This Andean Empire. Here is an aerial shot of that settlement. And this is Machu Picchu, where the Peruvians fled away from the Spanish, and this was their last stronghold. I think another stronghold has just recently been discovered, but this is the one that's been known for a long time, Machu Picchu. And here we see a little bit of the incredible stonework. This is all this stonework is done without cement in between the rocks. They're all just fitted together, the stones, for those walls and those terraces. And look how steep those terraces are on that hillside. There's amazing agriculture that they've done down the side of the mountains. And so this is what Pizarro conquered. And again, we have to mention that the only domesticated animal they had was the llama. They had dogs. Both the Aztecs and the Mayas and the Incas had dogs and turkeys, but they had very little meat animals. They didn't have domesticated animals. They didn't have the wheel either, and so they couldn't use animal labor. They used the llamas as pack animals, and we remember that this was a great boost to the building of the Inca Empire, but nothing like these men riding on horseback. I mean, the Europeans clearly had the technological edge, and when they conquered, they built magnificent cathedrals all over Mexico and Peru as they took over the whole empire, and then they imported Christianity and the kind of European building that you see here, which should remind you in some ways of the cathedrals of Europe that we've seen. But it's colonial architecture. It had to be adapted to the New World. And so this is the cathedral in Cusco in Peru. And here is the high Andes Mountains where they lived. Okay, here is the English discoveries in America that we can see here, and this is, go back to my map here, North America and the voyage of Drake, Sir Francis Drake, going from England and around the world. This would have been in the time of Queen Elizabeth that he's doing this. And you can see the explorations of the English in North America. Okay, in North America, the Spanish started exploring the whole continent. The English went to the north, and the French went to the north. There were French explorers in the north in Canada, and English settlers along the coast of North America in modern-day Massachusetts and New York and Virginia. And Spanish explorers then went northward and went along the coast of Florida. Here is Ponce de Leon coming from Puerto Rico and settling, actually having a Spanish settlement in St. Augustine. You can see St. Augustine on that map toward the top of the Florida peninsula, and then sailing around and going back to Puerto Rico. And then another Spanish explorer, De Soto, going up from the coast of Florida and across the American South and going west to the Mississippi River and beyond. You can see the route of De Soto exploring North America. Now these explorers were looking for gold, and they didn't find it, because in North America there were no great rich civilizations. There were more nomadic tribesmen, and those that were settled did not build huge civilizations. Here's the old Spanish gateway at St. Augustine, or I think it's pronounced St. Augustine in Florida. Spanish gateway, and here is Balboa, who then also continued across the southwest and discovered the Pacific Ocean. So the Spanish explorers are going out in practically no time at all. Here are the Spaniards bartering with the Indians as their ship comes up, and they barter with the Indians, giving them beads and red cloth. The Indians like beads and red cloth. That's the same thing the Vikings gave them, by the way, which is interesting. And here are the Indians resisting the invaders, resisting the white men who are coming. They pretty quickly realized that the Spaniards were not their friends and who were there to take over their land and whatever they could get. And here's Balboa coming to the Pacific, going all across the southwest and reaching the Pacific, where he takes possession of the Pacific Ocean for the King of Spain, okay, which was quite ambitious of him, I think. But he didn't know how big it was, so there he is. Here are the natives who were terribly mistreated by the Spaniards. The natives are thrown to the dogs, and they retaliated. Here is a picture of the natives who captured Spaniards, and they said to them, "You want gold? We'll give it to you." And so here he's pouring molten gold into the mouths of the Spaniards to retaliate for the horrors. And there's a bonfire back there where they're cooking them, actually, if you look in the back. This is a drawing, of course. We don't know if this really happened, but there is a story about the Indians pouring molten gold into the mouths of the Spaniards because they wanted gold. Here's the building of ships. Of course, the Spaniards had to build new ships when often their ships would be wrecked, and they had to build new ones. And they quickly organized the labor of the Indians and virtually enslaved them to do the work that they needed to have done. Here is the execution of Balboa. He was actually executed. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly why he was executed, but he was. Okay. Now, the crown, the English claimed all of the coast of North America, and the crown granted the lands to the trading companies. The English land grants along that coast are where the English settled. Let's move to and the theory was that they had the coastal settlements, but the land was granted to them in strips as far west as they could go. Okay, so that they were granted the land far to the west, as much as they could take. Okay, now the old world encounters the new. Okay, this is what is called the Columbian Exchange, and there's a very famous book that's written called The Columbian Exchange that lists what the new world gave to the old and what the old world gave to the new, and these and part of the theories are explaining why the Europeans were so successful in conquering the New World. First of all, the New World had many fewer native plants and animals than the Old World did, and they just did not have the rich resources as Eurasia and Africa. Look at what the New World had that was new that they gave to the Old World. Chocolate and vanilla are native to the New World. Llamas and alpacas, which weren't adopted very widely in Europe. Corn or maize is the staple crop that practically all of North American food culture is based on. Peppers, all kinds of peppers, whether hot or cool, bell peppers or jalapeno peppers, hot peppers, all peppers are native to the New World. I don't have squash on there, I'm sorry. Squash, all squashes come from the New World. Tomatoes and potatoes of course are very important to the Inca culture. We have to add avocados, are native to the New World. Turkeys, I don't believe turkeys were domesticated, but they were hunted, but they are a meat animal. Note the absence of meat animals. Now, we might mention dogs. They did domesticate dogs, and dogs were present in the New World. They ate them. There was a big shortage of meat in the diet of the New World culture. Sugar and sugar cane, and this was quickly converted by the Europeans into rum, and this became a basis of the trade with the New World. Syphilis is native to the New World and was spread to Europe, and tobacco, two of the scourges of the world, originated in the New World. Now let's look at what the Old World gave to the New. Okay, note there are no horses, cattle, pigs, sheep, or goats in the New World. All of these are European contributions to the New World. And so when you see those Mustangs galloping across the plains of North America, those are the horses that escaped from the Spanish that acclimated to the New World. So all horses and saddles and armor, that came from Europe. Cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats, all the meat we think of that we eat, that came from Europe. Also the grains that are common that we use in our diet now, wheat, rye, barley, and oats, all of those, remember where those came from? Those came from Mesopotamia, didn't they? Those were domesticated in Mesopotamia, and now they're the basic staple crops of the whole world. Gunpowder and cannons were European inventions, but remember that gunpowder first came from China, right? And so the Europeans, the Chinese made firecrackers, the Europeans made guns. And so, but the gunpowder came from China. Watermills and windmills, again, the power engines of the New World were also the power engines of the Old World. The wheel did not exist in the New World. It was a gift from the Old World to the New World. Conestoga wagons that you think about going in the wagon trains across the plains of North America, those are medieval wagons. I'm going to show you one in a minute. They look exactly the same in European medieval cities as they do in the covered wagons. Well, they're prettier and fancier in Europe, but they're the basic same thing. All the fruits we're used to, apples, pears, peaches, oranges, apricots, and plums. All of those. Interestingly, I was trying to find out where strawberries and raspberries came from. Interestingly, they're native to both the New World and the Old World. Cranberries are native to the New World. They're similar to lingonberries in Scandinavia. They're related, but they're cranberries in the New World and lingonberries in the Old World. Lemons, limes, tangerines, those originally came from China. Okay, as I think apricots and oranges also came from China. Chickens, ducks, geese, domestic cats, all of those. And the other European gift to the New World, smallpox, measles, chickenpox, and whooping cough, which then caused huge epidemics in the New World. And Jared Diamond wrote his book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, where he argues that is an interesting argument, I think is very valid. He says that because there were so many domestic animals in Eurasia, remember we talked about Mesopotamia where all these animals were domesticated, and that Europeans and Asians lived with these animals in such close quarters that Europeans became immune to very many diseases and had built really strong immune systems. And so when the Europeans came to the New World and brought these animals, the Indians did not have that immunity. But you know, you have to think about it. It's a mistake to think that the Europeans deliberately introduced these diseases. They had no idea of germ theory. They had no idea that they were carrying diseases. It was purely an accident that they spread these diseases to the Indians. They didn't do it deliberately. There's also been a recent study, and I think I told you about it when we did our lecture on the New World, that there's been a study of graveyards and looking at the bones of people and seeing when they died and what condition their bodies were in. And there's a theory that they were very weakened from malnutrition, that their diet was just not really good enough because they don't have enough protein in their diet. And so that they were physically weakened when the Europeans got there anyway with those diseases. So it's too simplistic to think of the Europeans as invaders wiping these people out. I mean, it's a much more complicated situation than that. And you have to think of the Europeans as giving some gifts to the New World, good gifts, as well as bad things like smallpox and measles and diseases. Okay. Any questions or comments about the Columbian Exchange that you have? It's kind of extraordinary, isn't it? The guy who wrote this book called The Columbian Exchange, I think his name is Crosby, and he's written some other interesting books about the exchange between the New World and the Old World, but it certainly is an interesting, extraordinary theory. Okay, here's the tobacco plant, a noxious gift of the New World to the Old, which it might have epidemic properties equal to smallpox if we look at the people who died of lung cancer from it. Here, I told you I would show you a Conestoga wagon. This is a medieval wagon. This is a very fancy one, but it's the same kind of wagon that the settlers who went across the plains of North America took with them. And in fact, Lynn White Jr. wrote an incredible article about the technology of the American Southwest. And when he sat down to list everything that was European and medieval, he came to the conclusion that the whole technology of the American Southwest was medieval. Conestoga wagons, windmills, water mills, guns, all of these things were medieval inventions. The wheel, the animals that they used, horseback riding, herding animals. Okay. New institutions and developments as a result of the exchange of culture. The feudal manor, which I told you about as part of the medieval culture and the way that the medieval countryside, the agriculture was organized, was imported with some changes to the New World. The encomienda in South America turned the Indians into a kind of serf, living on the land, or if not slaves, sometimes they were actually slaves. But it is a model that is very much like the medieval manner as it was that we saw in Europe, as it developed in the feudal system. The plantations in the American South, again, where you have slaves instead of serfs, but the way the plantations are laid out with the little slave huts and the big house and the division of the land into areas for farming, the use of the plow. The plow is also European. That's introduced to the New World. The plantation in the American South is almost a mirror image of the feudal manner that we saw before. Christianity was imported into the New World. The native religions were pretty much wiped out. The Aztec and Mayan books were burned. Of course, the Incas didn't have books. They didn't have a written language. The native religions are often said to have been extinguished, but have you examined Mexican Christianity lately? If you look at Mexican Christianity, and the most outstanding thing is, for example, the Day of the Dead, when they pile up the sugar skulls and they have these ceremonies in the graveyards. Those are Aztec ceremonies transformed into Christian ceremonies. I mean, they're still, as is true of Christianity everywhere it went in the world, it adapts to native conditions. It did that when it moved from the Roman Empire into Europe, and it does that as it moves into all the different cultures where Christianity went. The native religions really merge with Christianity, and the native Christianity is very absorbed with native traditions that become adapted to the Christian culture. One of the really interesting things that happens because of the discovery of the New World is the explosion of new sciences that never existed before. Anthropology is the study of what? Native people everywhere. Botany, the study of plants. And zoology, the study of animals. It's because they discovered all these wonderful new plants and animals and people in all different areas of the world, not only the New World, but of course the Pacific and Africa and China. And so these new sciences were born to begin the study of native peoples and native plants and native animals in all the different places of the world. And wonderful artists would go on these ships with the explorers, and of course they had no cameras, so they couldn't take pictures, so they had to bring artists with them to draw all of these plants and animals, exotic plants and animals and people. And so you have this explosion of art that was very popular in Europe to see the exotic animals and plants and people that were discovered. Eventually, you have Charles Darwin arising as the inventor of evolution, because he was so interested in the variations of these plants and animals. He developed eventually developed his theory of evolution. In Europe itself, there was an explosion of travel literature. In England, the Hakluyt Society published hundreds of volumes of descriptions of the new places that were found in the world. A lot of the New World plants were imported into Europe. The potato, in particular, became a very popular everywhere in the world. The tomato was called a love apple. At first they thought it was poison, but then they sort of caught onto it. And you know, of course, the Italians in particular caught onto it. It's kind of interesting that it looks like Marco Polo brought noodles to Italy from China, And the explorers from Italy brought tomatoes back from the New World, so finally they had spaghetti. It came very late in Italian history. Potatoes were very, very popular in the New World because they grow so well, and you can grow them in very small plots of land very conveniently. And interestingly, they became the staple food almost everywhere. When you go to Europe today, you get French fries everywhere, pommes frites, but well, we call them freedom fries sometimes, but I like to call them French fries. But you get them everywhere in Europe. Everywhere you go, you have French fries. And they particularly became a staple in Ireland, which was very, very poor. And they could grow a lot of potatoes and support a lot of people. But they made a mistake. Remember that when we talked about Peru and the different varieties of potatoes, remember they had little niches all the way up the mountain, so you had different kinds of potatoes being grown at every different altitude and the little niche cultures. Well, only the Idaho potato was imported to Ireland. They only grew one kind of potato there that survived very well, and it caught a disease. And when you had the potato famine in Ireland, practically the whole country starved to death. And this is an impact of the discovery of the New World, because their economy, their food economy, became based on the potato, and this was disastrous for them. When they had a potato blight that wiped out the potato crop, they practically all starved to death, and that's why so many Irish came to America, because they were starving in Ireland, so they escaped to America. So that's one of the consequences of the discovery of the New World. Okay, any comments, questions at this point? Okay. Windmills. I wish I had a picture of a Texas windmill, because there are windmills all over Texas. They're medieval. Remember, they were invented in the Middle Ages by people who didn't have a stream for their water mills. Okay, so water wheels. Until the invention of the steam engine, this was the main source of power. It was the medieval source of power. That was the basis of the Industrial Revolution in the Middle Ages, remember, around the year 1000. And this became the source of power in the American West. Okay, so that water mills were extremely important in powering the economy. Horses and riders of all kinds, and here we see a knight who's kind of an ancestor of the American cowboy. You know, cowboys aren't military, but certainly horses and riders are the foundation of the European settlement of the New World. And here is the medieval manor with the big house in the middle, the castle or the manor house, and the division of the lands, the little village, and with a mill. They always have a mill, and they have grazing land, and this becomes the pattern in the American South and also in the encomiendas in South America. Okay. And here are some Mexican laborers who then were practically enslaved by the Spaniards who conquered them. This is in Mexico, and of course they had no wheels and they had no pack animals in Mexico, so this is the traditional kind of labor that would have been used before European animals were introduced. Okay. I think that's the end. Yes, it is. Okay. We have a little bit of time for questions or comments, either about the Age of Discovery or about the exam that's coming up next week. The review sheet is on the website so that you can see the review questions. Are you all comfortable with those? No questions or comments. Everyone's tired out. Okay, well now we have brought the entire world together. We've linked up Europe with the Americas and with Asia and with China and India, and we already had linked with the Mongols. We'd linked Europe and Asia together in a different way. The Pacific, we brought the Pacific into the network, and so we at last have one global civilization that we've pulled together from very different and separated areas that we began with, which were the centers of the first civilizations. And so we've traced the development of the world up until about 1500. We've gone a little bit beyond 1500. And so you'll have to take up the story of the world history in the successor to this class, World History After 1500. Okay. We ended up a little early.